Thank you for joining us this morning for this week's live Q&A. We're just having a little look around the apiary and looking at a hive that might need a brood inspection so we can show you what's down here in the bottom box. Now, I was just pulling the window off this hive and you can see that the bee numbers aren't too bad, but when I pulled it off this morning, you can only see a few bees there. So I pegged this hive as being a little bit low on bee numbers, and for that reason, we'll get in there, have a little look at the brood nest below, make sure everything is happy and healthy and that we have a good laying queen. And other observations from around the hive we can make is having a look at the entrance. Now, these are actually not looking too bad now, but for the purposes of a show and tell, we'll do a brood inspection on these. You can see bees coming and going, which is a great thing. Very hot day, so we expect the bees should be out and flying on this hot spring day here in the southern hemisphere. So we've got those bees in the window looking good, and then in the rear of the hive we have actually quite a lot of bees down between the frames, so this can be a useful view as well to gauge what the colony is like. So if you look down between the flow frames, you can see there's quite a number of bees there too. So I'm not too worried about this colony, but we'll have a look anyway. And down in the bottom, let's have a look in the tray, because sometimes that can be revealing as well as to how the hive is going. So it looks like the oil's been changed relatively recently, and we can see there's a bunch of hive beetles. See these black dots? They're the small hive beetles. Really useful pest management tray. One of the many things you can do with it is put some cooking oil in there, catch some of the hive beetles if you've got them in your area. Especially when the colony gets weak, activate your pest management tray, catch some of those beetles and give your flow hive a bit of a helping hand. Now, I'm going to put the ventilation up, which means air can flow through those vents up between the tray and the screen bottom board, allowing some nice ventilation to keep the hive cool on this hot day. If it was really hot, I could take the tray out altogether and that would assist the bees even further. So those vents will go up like that. One little trick with that vented cover is push it in all the way and make sure these little L screws are holding it from coming out, because you don't want bees to get up between your vented cover and the tray and drown in the oil in the pest management area. So putting on your bee suit is important when you're around the hive. If you're new to beekeeping, make sure you're well protected. Make sure the zips go all the way to the top and that they cross over in the middle as well. And then the Velcro is down over the top of those zips as well. Then you are ready to go. I'm using the clear view, which is an option we have for you. It comes with both the clear view and the mesh, so you can choose, and it's quite handy because you can see things like bee eggs down the cells a bit easier. Next, we're going to make sure we have our smoker going. I'm going gloveless today. If you're new to beekeeping, make sure you are wearing your gloves. I can see beautiful pollen balls coming in, which is super cool. And if you've got questions, put it in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. And I don't know if you can get a shot of that, but notice the bee with orange pollen. Give us a thumbs up if you can see a bee with orange pollen. It's been fanning and bending the tip of its tail slightly down, exposing what's called the Nasonov gland, which is a scent gland that they then fan to say, this is home, this is home. And it's probably because I've added the smoke to the hive, it's upset the scent of the hive, and so bees are trying to fix that by fanning their Nasonov glands. Pretty cool. So I'll add a bit of smoke to the hive just like that. A couple of puffs will do. I'll leave the smoker here so the hive gets a scent. We've got our weather guard on today. We'll leave that there and proceed with our brood inspection, which means taking this top box off and looking at the wooden wax frames down below. So first of all, we're taking off the gabled roof, and looks like some ants have moved in, so we might want to activate those ant guards as well. I don't need to take the inner cover off, so I might just leave that right there. And next thing I'm going to be doing while you're thinking of your questions is cracking off this box. So to do that, I'm going to jump up here and just use the chisel end of this tool to actually wedge in here and give it a bit of a lift like that. There we go, that's coming nice and free, which is what we want. Looks like the excluder wants to stay with the top box, so we'll leave it there. And now I can get up there and lift that box, and what I'm going to do is roll it forward and put it on the sleeper in front here. The reason why I'm going to roll it forward is I don't want to squash the bees underneath the flow frame, so I'm putting it flat down on a surface. If you've got questions, put it in the comments. Trace will read those out and we'll start to answer those as we go. Every week we do a live Q&A. Thanks for joining in. So that's now rolling forward like that, and it's actually not that heavy today because there's not a whole lot of honey. So putting that just on the front edge like that, I'll leave it right there and we can go about our brood inspection. Now somebody's done some spring management here and we have taken some frames out of this hive. So this frame is actually completely empty. But I might put it back towards the middle if I can. Now the bees are a little bit annoyed with me, so what I'm going to do is put on my gloves, and that way we won't get stings on our hands. And I'll blow a bit more smoke into the hive. There we go. So the bees usually let you know pretty early on what kind of temperament, what kind of mood they're going to be in. Genetics mainly sets that. So if they're showing aggressive traits, put on your gloves. There's nothing to prove. Just protect yourself and make the beekeeping a pleasant experience. So these are the gloves that come with our bee suits and bee jackets, and they're nice and soft and good for working your hive. A little bit more smoke, knowing that the bees were showing signs of getting a little protective, but it's no wonder, right? We're pulling apart their hive after all. So if the bees are showing aggression, don't be afraid to use more smoke. We'll pull out a first frame and then we'll start answering your questions. I'm going to jump up here and I'll pull out the easy frame, which is one that actually isn't being used at all. And we'll move that towards the center as part of our spring management. Now let's have a look at what's happening on this next frame. We've got a whole lot of pollen and only a couple of brood cells, you can see here. So this is the worker brood. They spend 11 days in that cocoon phase, and then they hatch as a fluffy little baby bee ready to do the chores of the hive. So they will emerge out of their cocoon and be ready to work. So that's a good sign. We've got brood out towards the edges, and if I keep going, and sometimes it's useful to use a smoker to get bees out of the way. So the smoker also calms bees, it also moves bees, so you don't squash them as you're working. Pull out one more, check that we've got a healthy colony here on this hot spring day here in the southern hemisphere. So we've got a bunch of brood there. It's not the best laying pattern, but in between is actually pollen, so I'm okay with that. But whenever you see patchy brood, you're always on the lookout for AFB, which is a spore-producing bacterium that is extremely contagious, and if you do find it, you'll have to follow the protocols in your country, which often means destroying the colony. So as a beekeeper, we're always looking out for that one just in case. And patchy brood might be the first sort of indication, followed by sunken dark cappings with piercings in them. Have a look at our resources and you'll be able to see what that looks like. but this all looks healthy so far. It's a nice brood on this side. You see that brood there? Gives a thumbs up if you can see the worker brood. And pop your questions in and soon we'll start answering those. Beautiful. We'll keep going through this hive as we answer your questions. Might jump around this side so you can see a bit better. And Tracy's just picking up the computer to have a look at what questions you're writing in, and don't be shy to jump in there. It's beginner beekeeping Q&A, everyone, which we do at the start of each month, so don't be afraid to chime in and ask those questions that you might think are silly or might think are naive. We all started off as new beekeepers once, but don't be shy to chime in, ask the questions, and we will do our best to answer them. Some more brood there, that's a good sign. And we've got larvae down the cells too, so they're in their grub phase or caterpillar phase, if you imagine, and then they spin a silk cocoon around themselves, and this is the silk cocoons. But give us a thumbs up if you can see the shining white larvae down the cells there.
Great, thanks Cedar. Sorry, I just had a bit of a microphone issue, but I think I'm good now. Just someone's tuning in and wondering, Cedar, the way you've put that Flow Hive Super, because the honey is maybe not capped off, is that a problem with it leaking out?
No, that's generally the way we like to put them because it keeps it in the same plane. So imagine this was a flow frame. If you tip it this way, the honey doesn't come out, but if you tipped it sideways, then it would. So you're avoiding putting the frame, the hive, on its side, but you can put it on its end, so that's very common in beekeeping. Great question.
Yeah, great. And MT's tuning in from Victoria, recently got a nucleus of bees, but it had chalk brood. It's been a few weeks and they seem to be very hygienic now, flying away, cleaning out all the chalk brood. The question that MT wants to know is, can bees recover without requeening?
Yes, they can. So the first thing to do is move your hive into a sunnier location. We've got tips on moving hives, short distances and long distances, if you want to have a look at those. But just as it's easier for the colony to get rid of the pathogen if it's a nice sunny location. So that'd be the first thing to do. Next, you would actually take out a bunch of the frames and dispose or burn them, and leave just a more minimal brood nest in here. So you're cycling out stuff that has the spores in it. And if that still doesn't remedy your problem, then as you say, requeening is the next thing to do, because you'll find that some genetics will deal with it fine and others won't. So you don't need to destroy your colony for chalk brood, you can nurse it back to health.
Right. This is a good question for you, Cedar, for someone who doesn't really eat onions or garlic. Geisha's wondering, is it true that if you eat lots of garlic, the bees won't sting you?
Oh, I don't know about that. So chime in, let us know if you've tested a theory of eating onions and garlic to stop bees stinging you. I mean, it might work in certain vampire areas, I guess. But my guess is no, but I have not tested that one. So all these things that get circulated around the beekeeping sphere, it's worth testing. And we sometimes do what we call myth busting, where we'll get one of these ideas and test it out. So I'll volunteer Trace for that one. She can eat the onions and garlic, and,
all right, okay.
And try some no beekeeping suit beekeeping and see if it works. No, sensible people, don't subject yourself to lots of stings. It's important to protect yourself. Okay. So we've got a lot of young larvae in this one. Look, they haven't finished completing this comb because it's a newer one. but we know the queen's in here laying relatively recently, because if you look at this area here, there's young larvae down the cell. It's really good to see. So this hive appears to be okay, and it'll be on its feet, hopefully producing some nice honey for us on the next nectar flow, when the flowers are really producing a lot of nectar.
Caesar, is it bad if you never drain the honey?
It is helpful to harvest the honey in the springtime. So if you decide you just want to leave it for the bees, the minimum thing to do is make sure there's enough space for the queen to lay eggs in the bottom. So one of the reasons why we suggest harvesting the honey in the springtime is it makes more space in the hive for the bees to move honey from down in these frames up to your flow frames, and that means there's areas for the queen to lay. You can get what's called honey bound, where the hive's so full of honey there's nowhere for the queen to lay, and that will likely trigger swarming, with half the bees going to find a new location. And we like to limit that if we can, keep our bees in our box, and harvesting honey in the springtime is good, but as said, you don't have to, and you can leave honey in hives all season if you want to.
Right. Cedar, would there be, what about adding a second story super, so having like a 2-story super hive?
Absolutely. So some people like to add lots of supers. I don't, just to keep things more simple. It's easy to lift off a single box and get into a single brood box for your inspections. However, keeping the hive smaller means you will have to manage harvest honey, as we were just talking about, also make space in the brood nest for the queen to lay. Otherwise you might get swarming. But if you add more boxes, then that's one way to create more space in the hive for your spring management, to limit swarming in the springtime. So you could add a second brood box, or you could add a second super or a third super if you want to, and that would also do the job of adding more space in the hive. Some people in the very cold areas will be typically stacking 5, 6, 7, 8 supers high, which is extreme, and they're on a step ladder to get the top boxes of honey off. Now with a flow hive, we have the ability to harvest honey directly from the hive and store honey in jars on the shelf, rather than adding boxes to batch process them at the end of the season like we used to do conventionally. So it gives you the ability to run your hive smaller, and that has a major saving of space in your shed. You don't have to leave all the sticky boxes there half the year, keep the vermin away from them, all the mess that creates, all the ants and so on. You can just run a more simple hive with the extraction unit built in with our flow frames, and that way it's just a bit easier to manage and doesn't take up space in your house as well.
If you've harvested some honey, Cedar, and there's like little white, little wriggly wormy things in it, is it okay to eat, and what are they?
Okay, if you're seeing tiny little larvae in your honey and they're wriggling, that's likely the hive beetles. So what you should do if you're seeing that is actually even remove the honey super altogether, freeze the frames. Obviously you brush off the bees, you freeze those frames, which will kill any hive beetle eggs, and it'll also lessen the space in the hive that the bees have to look after. So what you've got, if you see that, is early stage hive beetle infestation. So activate your pest management tray, put some oil in it, check that the brood nest is okay, and if you see areas that are kind of wet and slimy looking with those little hive beetle maggots moving around, then take it even a step further and take away some of the edge frames, replace them with blank ones like this, or if you're using naturally drawn comb, you can just cut out the comb and dispose of it, and just leave a smaller brood nest in the middle. That way you'll give your bees a chance to get on top of the situation. It's when you've got a lot of frames and not enough bees to cover them that you get what's called a slime out, where the hive beetles take over and it becomes a hive beetle nest rather than a beehive. So if you're seeing those maggots, just check that your brood nest is okay. Another spot to check also is the tray down below. If they're getting hold, the hive beetles getting a hold in the brood nest, you'll probably see those wriggly little thin maggots in your tray below. If they're thicker, bigger ones, they're probably just wax moth, not an issue. If they're the little fine ones, then they're likely the hive beetle larvae, and you'll need to do something about that.
And do you think seeds would be all right to eat the honey?
This is up to you, of course, but I tend to just taste it, and if it tastes sour, then it's got fermentation and issues in it. If it tastes like honey, then I would go ahead and eat it, but it's up to you.
Right. And what's the best, the ideal area to place the bees in your yard or your neighbourhood? And do you need a certain size garden as well?
The wonderful thing about beekeeping is you can keep a hive like this in a very small area. So it's very popular in the cities, in urban backyards, on balconies, on rooftops, and I think humans really yearn to do some farming and produce food at home, and honey is a beautiful food to produce and be able to share with your family and friends. So for that reason, beekeeping is very popular, and you only need this amount of space, especially with the flow hive, because all of the harvesting equipment is built in. You can then manage your colony in only this amount of space, even on a balcony in the city, and produce a real amount of beautiful honey that you can share with your family and friends.
Right, thanks, Cedar. Lynette's saying we all worry about swarming and do all we can to prevent it, but is it inevitable that at some point a hive will swarm?
As a beekeeper, you are likely to see your hive swarm, even doing your best efforts. Sometimes you've got swarmy genetics, and they, despite having lots of space, they will take off and form another colony anyway. After all, it's their natural kind of genetic trait, is to divide, create more colonies. That's how they survive as a species. Now, humans have come along and selectively bred for less swarmy genetics. So if you're having trouble with swarming, buy a nucleus or a new queen off a queen breeder, get some known genetics that are less swarmy, and when you do that, you can often go through multiple seasons without any swarms at all from your hive.
Right. And do you have a pollen trap that you can use on the flow hive?
We don't tend to trap pollen in our flow hives, but if you've got experience with that, chime in. But basically it's some brushes you put on the entrance. If you are using a pollen trap, the important thing is to only screen half the bees to collect their pollen that are coming in the entrance, because after all, the pollen is their protein source. They need that to create their bee bread, which then is fed to the developing larvae. So you don't want to take all the pollen away, but it is another thing you can collect from a beehive.
Right. Now Julian was gifted a flow hive and lives in Canberra, and just wondering what's the best time of the year to set it up in Canberra?
Right now is a beautiful time to get going in Canberra. My grandfather and my uncle and aunt and my cousins keep bees in Canberra, and this time of year is when all the blossoms are out. Things are looking good for the bees. There's plenty of resources. A wonderful time to get going. It's not to say you can't start at other times of the year, but now is perfect because we are in our we've just started our summer here in Australia, but in Canberra you'll find there'll be a lot of flowers the end of spring, the start of summer.
Right. And another question from David wondering, is it true that the water source for the apiary needs to be at least 5 metres from the hive?
It does tend to be so. That bees like to be hygienic, so when they're carrying their dead from the hive, they'll try and carry them as far as they can. When they're collecting resources like water, they'll try and collect it a little further away. So if you are setting up a watering station, which is easy to do by just getting some pebbles or sand in a bit of a tray and leave a dripping tap on it, then further away is going to be better for the bees than right under their entrance. So yes, further away is good.
Right. And how long would the flow hive last for?
So that's a great question, and we've got people that continually contact us and they're 9.5 years in, so we're very happy about that. We want to build things that are going to last. The world needs people to be building things that are lasting, not throwaway items. So our flow frames themselves, that we have a lot of customers that are now 9.5 years in, and what they find when they're sort of 5 to 9 years old is they like to give them a good clean with a pressure washer. Don't throw them away, and you can then use them. Now, the cedar wood will last a lot longer than the Araucaria. The Araucaria will tend to get rot soon, and you might be replacing some box parts. Whereas the cedar, it's not unheard of for people to get 50 years out of a cedar box because it's naturally resistant to rot and mold. I'm not promising it'll last that long, but we do hear of these stories.
Right, and that's good that you said that, Seeds, because MK saying how they love these podcasts, but just wondering if one day we could do a demo on how to clean the flow frames. They've had their flow frames for 5 years.
Okay, great. Yes, we'll make you a video on how to clean the flow frames with a pressure washer. We've found that's the best. We have tried all sorts of solvents and things, but getting out your good old pressure washer, the kind that you clean your driveway with, laying the frames down on a flat surface or leaning them up against something, make sure they're supported. You don't want them to blow apart into little pieces because it's annoying to put it all back together. Make sure it's supported on a surface, and you're just going down the cell lines with your pressure washer, paying special attention to this window side. These frames have been used for multiple seasons, and you can see the build up here. So if you want to gain that nice clear view back, then pay special attention to that window side, blast off as much wax as you can. To do that, you've got the cells in the open or harvesting position so the water can flow down through the cell lines as you wash them. Let it dry, reset the cells. You can put them back on a hive again when your colony is ready.
Great. Now, Mastering Many is saying, what are the signs to a beekeeper that it's time to do particular tasks?
Okay, so there's a lot of observations from outside the hive you can do. So you're looking to see bee numbers, and our flow hives have these windows on the side, which is extremely helpful to ascertain the bee numbers in a hive. Some commercial operators say, why do you bother with windows? We just lift the hive to see how much honey's in it and so on. But when we give them a hive with windows, they go, wow, this is actually really useful. So the windows are great observations to see bee numbers. So if you suddenly see their numbers drop, let's say in springtime bees might have swarmed and suddenly the numbers have halved in the hive, that's when you know you might need to do something about that. First of all, you activate your pest management tray down below here, put some cooking oil in it, catch the hive beetles if you have those in your area. Some local knowledge will let you know whether you have the small hive beetle in your area. But catching some of those will really assist your colony. And if the numbers don't bounce back, a good idea to pop off the honey super, get into the brood nest, have a look, make sure you do have a laying queen. While you're at it, have a look for any pests and disease issues as well. So observations from outside the hive will often let you know when it's time to do your brood inspections, but it's a good idea to pencil in some routine times to do it as well, to make sure you're being a responsible beekeeper and inspecting your frames for any signs of pests and disease. And what people find is it's actually fascinating to get in here, and it gets quite addictive to get into the brood nest and have a look what's going on. Let's pull out another frame and see what's going on. Okay, adding a little smoke here to clear the bees away. They were a bit grumpy early on, that's why I'm wearing my gloves, but they seem to have chilled out now, which is good. And look at this. This is a beautiful example of a naturally drawn comb full of brood. Look at that brood there. It is beautiful. Same on the other side. Now, if they haven't connected the comb to the sides and you're going foundationless, i.e. naturally drawn comb, then be careful not to tip it on its side. You don't want that beautiful brood comb falling out. So the way you get to look at the other side, you can do this and roll it like that, And now you're looking at the other side, which is equally as beautiful with a nice brood pattern. So when you see it clockwork across the frame like that, you go, now she's a keeper, a great queen. Now here, notice that not every single cell has brood in it, and that's on purpose because bees will actually go down those cells and warm up the comb by disconnecting their wing muscles and vibrating, and they're called heater bees. So it's actually good to see the odd cell empty, but generally hard-packed brood like that is a beautiful example of brood and a great example of naturally drawn comb as well. And they will connect it out to the edges when they're ready.
Right. Now Country Plant Lady's saying, just got a new hive and the bees have been in there for a week. When should I open the lid and check that they have brood, etc.?
Say that once more.
So I've just got a new hive and the bees have been in the hive for a week. So just wondering, when should I actually do an inspection, basically?
Okay. So if you've, you can go ahead and inspect a week in. That's a beautiful thing to do. If you've just installed, let us know what you've installed, whether it's a nucleus or what, but a week in you're fine. If you put a new queen in a little queen cage, then allow at least a week for her to settle in before opening it. So if you've installed a new queen in a cage like this, that's the only reason when you wouldn't really be opening the hive, apart from very cold days. But otherwise, get in there as much as you like, learn as much as you can, be curious and observe what's going on, and come here and ask questions or research to find answers. And that's the way you learn and become a great beekeeper, and it's a fascinating learning journey all the way.
And some good brood questions today, and here's another one saying, so they've obviously got their brood box, and if the edge of the frames aren't full yet, so the outside frames, does it mean they should wait before adding the super, or are there other things to look for that would give you the green light to add the super?
Yes, generally we like to wait till all of the frames are being used like this by the bees and there's lots of bees in the box before adding the super. Otherwise you're just adding space that they don't need yet. And you might get impatient that they're not working the flow frames yet as well. So waiting till the bees are ready and you've got all of the frames 90% full with the comb and you've got a lot of bees in the box, that's the time to add the super. If you're in a warm climate like this, you can go ahead and add it early if you want to. It won't bother the bees to have that space if you're in a warm climate, but if you're in a cold climate or a cold time of year, then don't give them excess space they don't need. That'll just make it harder for them to keep the hive warm at that body temperature that they need to keep the brood nest warm for the baby bees to survive.
Now Lisa is spotting lady beetles in their hive. Do you think they're okay?
Lady beetles
in
the hive. I'd like to see a photo of that. Certainly never seen lady beetles inside a beehive. Bees are usually pretty good at keeping things out. They have trouble with the small hive beetles, but generally they will keep all sorts of bugs and ants and things well out of their hive. Beautiful. Keep the questions coming in.
Yeah, some great ones. See, here's one question is about, you keep talking about brood. What is brood? Is that a group of bees?
So brood is the developing bees. So like many insects, they're going through a larval stage, like a caterpillar. But in this stage, they're stationary and they rely on the other bees feeding them. So you'll see what looks like a little white grub or caterpillar down the cell. If I go back a few frames, we had a great example of it. And they spend roughly 11 days in that phase and then another 11-ish days in the cocoon phase. That larvae will spin a silk cocoon around itself, go through its metamorphosis, grow its wings and its eyes and its legs, and emerge as a fluffy little baby bee. So we call that brood. So this is the worker brood. And I can tell it's worker brood because it's capped flush with the cells. If it was sticking out like little mounds, that would be the drone brood or the males. Great questions. Beginner beekeeping this week, so any questions you might be afraid to ask, chime in. I'm happy to answer anything that might help you get going in this beautiful pursuit of keeping bees and harvesting honey.
Right. So to Mastering Many got another question, has cerebral palsy and wonders if you have any tips on using a flow hive for someone that doesn't always have the best body movement.
Okay, so we do find that people with, as you might say, restricted body movement, or perhaps they might have trouble with their back or limbs or so on, do tend to like the flow hive because you don't have to go through that process to do the harvesting that you once did. You can harvest directly from your hive. Having said that, when it comes to inspecting the brood, you might need to get a hand to lift that box off and do your brood inspection. But harvesting the honey is half the work, if you like, and that can all be done right here in the hive without having to go through that long labour-intensive heavy lifting process that it once was. So for that reason, we do get a lot of people gravitating towards the flow hive for its ease of honey harvesting. Okay, chime in.
So do certain types of breeds make more honey or are better depending on the climate, or are there any significant difference between the different types of bee breeds?
Beekeepers that breed bees for sale generally have their favourites, and what they'll do is they'll go to their colonies that are producing a lot of honey, also have other traits like being nice and gentle and hopefully hygienic, keeping pathogens like chalk brood away and other things. They will then breed from those colonies. So just ask, if you are buying what's called a nucleus, a little mini hive off a bee breeder, then ask for those traits of nice, productive and gentle and hopefully hygienic as well. And that's what they're breeding for anyway. It doesn't matter so much whether they're Caucasians or Italians or Carnolians. Those are breeds that your beekeeper will be familiar with, and they will be choosing what's working best for them. And so go with what your local beekeepers are recommending.
Right now, Milan's tuning in from Belgrade in Serbia and wondering, how do you know if there is a queen in the hive? How do the bees behave in that situation?
So if there is a queen, you'll be seeing the larvae, but from the outside of the hive it can be harder to tell whether there's a queen. There are some tricks that people do use, like whacking the hive and listening to the tone that the bees produce, and whether it's a hiss or more of a roar can determine whether they have a queen, it's said. Chime in, let us know if you've ever used that technique. But generally what we do to find out whether a hive has a nice laying queen is we pull out a frame and have a look for brood and eggs down the cells and larvae. If you're seeing eggs or larvae down the cells, you've obviously got a laying queen. Aside from when you get laying workers, which can happen, but they will turn into drones only. So if you've got worker brood, you're pretty good. Now here's some drones. If you have a look at this, we were talking earlier about drones and worker brood. So if I get some of these bees out of the way, I might even use the bee brush, or I could shake them off, and you'll notice that this area here has these mounds of brood cells sticking out like little mounds. They're the males, or the drones. You can see one just at the tip of the brush there. That's a very dark one, and it's got big eyes that touch together in the middle. That's the way to tell a drone from a worker when you're just starting out. And here you've got the worker brood in this section. Give us a thumbs up if you can tell the difference between the worker brood, which has its capping nice and flush, and the drone brood, the males over here, which are sticking out like mounds. And looking down the cells, we've got a bit of nectar, we've got a bit of bee bread as well. So we've got all the ingredients to a healthy hive. Here to answer an earlier question, this is what you're looking for when you're looking for the presence of a queen, is the young larvae. Because in the last week she must have been laying. Give us a thumbs up if you can see down the cells the shining white larvae. We've got a good angle there. Okay, let's see if we can get a good angle. I'm actually getting a good angle from the top, even though I don't like to this over. Have a look at that. Do you have the shining white larvae down the cells? Give us a thumbs up if you can see it in this area here. Okay, I'm doing what I said you shouldn't do and tip the comb over. If you're going foundationless like this, there's no wire reinforcement, there's no plastic foundation, just natural wood and wax. The bees have made all of their wax themselves, which is my favourite method because it's less work. And there's a few other reasons. Okay, chime in. We've got time for a couple more questions.
Oh, great seeds. A couple of people are asking actually, how do you know when you harvest honey that the flow frame is fully capped? And is it okay to actually pull the flow frame out and check it before you harvest?
By all means, if you want to get a reference of what's happening inside the hive as to what you're seeing in the window, that can be a great way to learn. We have designed the flow frames so you don't have to pull the hive apart. So once you're confident that what you're seeing here is giving you a good idea of what's happening inside the hive, you can go ahead and harvest the honey without having to pop a frame out. And that's the beautiful thing about flow frames. Generally, you can use this rear window and the side window to get a good idea of when it's time to harvest. You can see here in the side window that there is no honey down the cells and there's no capping on them, so you certainly wouldn't be harvesting at the moment. As they progress, they usually, but not always, will fill and cap this end frame. Occasionally you get bees that resist capping the very extremities, but usually they do, and that's a really good way to tell when it's time to harvest, is when you're seeing full cells and their capping is like a lid on a preserving jar down each cell here. And then you can go ahead and harvest the frames that look nice and full.
See, Paul's wondering, he's in South Australia, just wondering, he can't start his beekeeping journey till Christmas. Do you think that would be too late?
So South Australia, chime in if you're from that area and you know the season, but my guess is that summertime in South Australia will have a lot of flowers, a lot of resources for the bees, and a great time to get started in beekeeping. But chime in if you're from South Australia and let us know what the season is like. And it can be quite specific. Like 2 hours drive from here, completely different seasonality as far as beekeeping goes than right here close to the coast. So exactly where you are will determine what the season is like as well. And whether there's been drought or whether there's been rain or whether there's been fires, all of this will affect, like all sorts of farming, the weather conditions will affect the fruit set, or in this case the nectar in the flowers for the bees to go and get and bring back into the hive, and also the pollen that they bring back to make their bee bread. And those are the two things they need to create all of their wax and to create a functioning hive, build up their numbers and collect enough honey for you to share some too.
Right. And Cody wants to know, and a lot of people actually ask this question, can you just start a beehive with a queen without a nuke?
No, a single queen is useless on her own. She relies completely on being fed by the other bees, and she doesn't build wax, so she can't make any comb. So what you'll need to do as a minimum is buy what's called a package, which is a bunch of bees and a queen that can come in a box in a male. You can shake it into your hive, look after them, and they'll grow from there. But probably the easiest way to get started is to buy what's called a nucleus off a bee breeder. So you've got about half of these frames in a little box. You transfer them to your place, situate them where you want your hive on a nice warm sunny day, which could be a week or a month ahead. Transfer them into your brood box, look after them, and they'll grow from there. Other ways to get going would be take a split from a friend, which they will appreciate in springtime because you'll be taking some of the frames out, making more space, limiting their hive from swarming. And you can start, as long as those frames you've got have some eggs in them, they'll raise their own queen typically, and away you go. Or you could take some frames, get a queen from a queen breeder in a little cage if you want some known genetics, and you'll be adding that to your hive and look after them and they'll grow. We've got all of these methods of starting hives, whether it be a nucleus, a split, a package or a swarm. We've got videos showing you just how to get going in beekeeping and store your bees and how to look after them. And if you do want an online course, we have one at thebeekeeper.org, which is an amazing course with experts from all around the world chiming in to create a lot of useful beekeeping tuition. It's a fundraiser, gets rave reviews, and it's also free to try. So have a look at thebeekeeper.org if you do want an online course made to take you from square one right through to even a deep scientific knowledge in beekeeping.
Cedar, Matthew wants to know, is it okay to do a brood inspection if all your bees are bearding out the front?
Yes, when they're bearding out the front, they're probably just creating a bit of space in the hive for ventilation. So on hot days, if you've got a lot of bees and you've got a healthy colony, typically you'll see a lot of bees vacating the hive and hanging off the landing board, allowing good ventilation. And you can go ahead and inspect your colonies. If it's springtime, you'll be making some space in them by actually cutting out some comb like we have here, and then you'll be adding that back towards the center of the colony. So put that back in, say here, and that will then make some space and limit your hive from swarming. Or you can add more boxes, whether it be another brood box or a super, to add more space in your hive as well. Another tip when the bees are really bearding is you can take your tray out altogether and allow a lot of ventilation, and that will assist them to keep their hive cool.
Violet's asking, Cedar, how will they know if they have chalk brood? What does it look like?
Great question. So chalk brood is a pathogen that turns the developing larvae into what looks like little lumps of chalk. So it's quite easy to identify, and typically the first place you'll see it is on the landing board as they drag out some of those chalk brood mummies, as we call them, or in the tray below. So if you're seeing in the tray below these what looks like little lumps of white or green chalk, then that is the chalk brood. And as we said earlier, the first thing you do is move your hive into a sunnier location, and from there you can take some of the older frames away to limit how much pathogen build-up there is. If that still doesn't work, change the queen. That will usually remedy that issue of chalk brood.
Right. Cedar, rays in a region of the USA and they get really hot, probably sounds like temperatures like us here, for a week or two. Will this affect the super or the flow hive?
We get hot days here in Australia too, and the amazing thing about the Apis mellifera, European honeybee, is they are incredible at adapting to very hot or very cold conditions. So in the hot times, just make sure they got plenty of ventilation. As said earlier, you can take out the tray below, or you can put water sources out for them, because they will collect water, take it back to the hive and fan those droplets of water using evaporative cooling techniques to cool the hive. And that's one of the extraordinary things about bees, is they're just really good at maintaining the temperature they need for their brood nest. So yes, they can handle very hot conditions in arid, dry, desert climates. They can handle very cold conditions in knee-deep in snow. Extraordinary species they are. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions as we put this hive back together.
Great, Cedar. Big Love on TikTok wants to know, what are the indications that they could split the hive and start a new one?
Okay, when you have a lot of bees, and the flow hive's great for learning when it's time to do something about what we call overcrowded. So if you're seeing when you open the side window that you can hardly see the comb, then it's a good time to take a split, assuming you're not just prior to a long winter ahead. So that's the time when you wouldn't, but in the spring or summer, you open the side windows, you cannot see the comb because there's too many bees. Get ahead of the curve, make some space in your hive either by adding more boxes or, as you say, take a split by taking some of the frames out to start a new colony. If you don't want another hive, somebody else surely will. You'll be helping them get started in beekeeping. The entrance is another spot you'll see a lot of bees bearding when they have overcrowding. But if you're seeing a lot of bees bearding at the entrance, but you open the side windows and there's not many bees in there, that just means they're hot. Doesn't necessarily mean they're overcrowded. But if you see bees building up at the front and you can't see the comb in the side windows, then they certainly are overcrowded, and it's a good idea to do something about that, or your hive may do what they do naturally and swarm with half the bees leaving.
Great. Here's a great last one on someone tuning in from Nepal. They get a lot of rain, and during the monsoon season, of course, the flowers can get damaged. And just wondering, does rain affect the bees? I mean, we can talk about that because we get a lot of rain here as well.
We get a lot of rain here. Now, interesting thing about rain is it can wash nectar out of flowers, and it can also add a high moisture content to the nectar. Sometimes it can even ferment on the tree, so the nectar can ferment in the flowers and actually produce alcohol, and the bees can get drunk, and that can cause issues because drunk bees, they won't actually let into the hive. The bouncers at the door will kick drunk bees right out. So it's a good idea. There's not much you can do about that, actually. Drunk bees are just part of the world of bees, I guess. But in those rainy times, you might see that they are depleting the amount of resources they have in the hive. You might see the nectar disappearing as they consume some of the honey and resources and use it to feed the young below. So a good idea not to harvest in those rainy times, and also a good idea to make sure you're activating your pest management tray down the bottom to collect any hive beetles, as the colony might be reducing in size as they consume their resources, and the queen will be stimulated to lay less eggs and the colony will shrink a little bit, which is the natural process. But rain also sets off the next flowering. So what you'll find is it'll set off the flowers, and soon you'll hopefully have nectar again for your bees to build up. Hopefully store some honey in your flow frames so you can share some too. Thanks a lot for tuning in for this week's live Q&A. We're going to put this little hive back together, say thanks for the show and tell, and we will be back next week with another live Q&A. Have we got one last question?
Oh. If you buy a flow hive, is it likely that a bee colony would just move in without having to purchase bees and a queen?
Unlikely, but you can make what's called a bait hive. If you are near a whole lot of hives like this, then you might really increase your chances of bees moving into your hive if you set up your hive, just the brood nest, nearby, let's say within a few hundred meters away from existing hives in the springtime. And a swarm might go, that's a perfect home, and move right in. If you put a little lemongrass oil in the hive, that'll help attract, because it mimics a pheromone that the bees use. Now, much more reliable is getting some bees from a friend by taking a split, or ordering some bees from a bee breeder. And that's generally how everyone starts. Catching a swarm is another fun way to go. And we've got videos of all of these things at thebeekeeper.org, also on our Facebook page, also on our YouTube channel. And we're here each week to help answer your questions. Thanks so much for chiming in. We're going to put the top box back on, put this hive back together, and we're happy that they have a laying queen. Now I'm just going to blow a little smoke. My smoke has gone out because I've been talking too long, but smoke is a useful tool for actually getting the bees to move, which is exactly what we need to do when we're putting this hive back together. So I'm just going to throw some more garden mulch in here, give it a little puff, remembering that the smoker could be quite hot, so wear your gloves or use your hive tool to add extra fuel to your smoker. So there it goes, give it a few puffs to get it going again. And you usually need to do this a couple of times during your beekeeping session just to make sure your smoker keeps going. And we can use that then to get bees to move out of the way, because we will try our best not to squash them as we put the hive back together. Now, as a new beekeeper, it's frightening to squash a bee, but as you go on you realise that there's a massive turnover of bees, and it won't affect the colony to lose a few, although we try our best not to. The queen can lay up to a couple of thousand eggs a day, which means there's also that many bees emerging from cells and dying each day. Because bees only live, these worker bees live for 4 to 6 weeks, because they beat their little foraging wings 240 cycles a second. They fly up to 10 kilometers and they wear their wings out. And once they've worn their wings out, that will be the end of their days. Okay, so I've got the smoker going again. I'm smoking all these bees away. That's it. Now it's really going. That's what you want to see. There's none around the edge, which is a good time to then put our box back on. I'm just going to lift it up and put it right back on top, and then we'll have our hive back together. You can also use a bee brush to brush bees away and get them off the excluder like that, out of the way. Seize the opportunity to put that right back on. And thank you, bees, for cooperating today. Line it up like this, and we can now put back on our window covers. Don't forget to put them on, because you don't want a lot of sun shining through them and heating up the hive in this hot summer's day here in the southern hemisphere. And the rear window cover, and finally your nice gabled roof, which is a nice touch. Looks nice in the garden, but also adds another layer of insulation to stop that harsh sun warming up the inside of your hive. Thanks again for all your great questions. We'll be back next week. Let us know what you'd like us to cover, and if you're chiming in answering questions, thank you very much. It's amazing to see a community all around the world